from chasing after my dreams. But I'm saying here I am. I'm saying I want you again. I know I'm not much, but I know I'm in some. I know I have failed you, but I see you have won. I know I am scared, but your heart overwhelms me, yeah, overwhelms me. 'Cause I know I'm not much, but I know I'm in some. I know I have failed you, but I see you have won. I know I am scared, but your heart overwhelms me, yeah, overwhelms me. Now I'm facing towards tomorrow, 'cause you're outside of time and space. How long you've been watching? You've been watching over me. I call you Abba, I call you Father, 'cause that's what you are. Now I see you prepared the fatted calf, 'cause your son has come home. Yeah, here I am.
We're going to start with just some quiet worship for a second as we enter in.
Let's sing in honor and power to you, our God. Under your mighty hand, we are bowed down. You who sit on the throne, you created all things, reign now and forevermore, for you are the King.
You are the King of Kings.
You are the King of Kings. You are the Lord of Lords. You are the King of Kings. Yes, you are the Lord. You are the Lord. We sing hallelujah to you, Almighty Lord. For you are holy, O Lord. You are holy, you are mighty, you are holy. Great are you, O Lord. For you are Lord, King, Messiah, Master and Lord of all. We sing hallelujah. Sing hallelujah. of Kings. You are the King of Kings. You are the Lord of Lords. You are the King of Kings. Yes, you are the Lord. You are the King of Kings. You are the Lord of Lords. You are the King of Kings. Yes, you are the Lord. You are the Lord. You are the Lord. You are the Lord. You are mighty, you are holy, and you are awesome in your power. You are mighty, you are holy, you are awesome in your power. You have risen, you have conquered, you have beaten the power of death. Hallelujah. We will rejoice. Hallelujah. We will rejoice. You are mighty. You are holy. You are awesome in your power. You have risen. You have conquered. You have beaten the power of death. Hallelujah. We will rejoice. Hallelujah. We will rejoice. Hallelujah. We will rejoice. Hallelujah. We will rejoice. Shout to the Lord. Yeshua. joy at the work of your hand. Forever I love you, forever I stand. Nothing compares to the promise I have in you. Yeshua, Mashiach, Lord, there is none like you. All of my days, I want to praise the wonders of your mighty love. My comfort, my shelter, tower of refuge, strength, let every breath, all that I am, never cease to worship you. Shout to the Lord of the earth, let us sing. Power and majesty, praise to the King. Mountains bow down and the seas will roar at the sound of your name. I sing for joy at the work of your hands. Forever I love, forever I stand. Nothing compares to the promise I have. Oh, nothing compares to the promise I have. Oh, nothing compares to the promise I have in you. In you.
We tune because we care. Okay, guys? Sorry. Kadosh.
I'd rather be. No place I'd rather be. No place I'd rather be. Here in your love, here in your love. No place I'd rather be. No place I'd rather be. No place I'd rather be. Here in your love, here in your love. Set a fire down in my soul that I can't contain, that I can't control. I want more of you, God. I want more of you, God. Set a fire down in my soul that I can't contain, that I can't control. I want more of you, God. I want more of you, God. I'd rather be. No place I'd rather be. Here in your love, here in your love. Set a fire down in my soul that I can't contain, that I can't control. I want more of you, God. I want more of you, God. Set a fire down in my soul that I can't contain, that I can't control. I want more of you, God. I want more of you, God. I want more. 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 Won't you pour it out? I want more. 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 Won't you pour it out? No place I'd rather be. No place I'd rather be. No place I'd rather be. Here in your love, here in your love. No place I'd rather be. No place I'd rather be. No place I'd rather be. Here in your love, here in your love. Set a fire down in my soul that I can't contain, that I can't control. I want more of you, God. I want more of you, God. Set a fire down in my soul that I can't contain, that I can't control. I want more of you, God. I want more of you, God. I want more, 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 I want more. Won't you pour it out? I want more, 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 I want more. Won't you pour it out? I want more.
Gadol Elohai. Shem
is our God. Above all names. The name above all names. Worthy of all praise. Heart will sing. Great is our God. You're the name above all names, worthy of all praise. My heart will sing, how great is our God. Gadol Elohai. I will lift my hands to the Lord my God. To him alone will I sing his praise. I will sing. I will lift my hands to the Lord my God. To him alone will I sing his praise. I will sing. I will praise. I will lift my hands to the Lord my God. To him alone will I sing his praise. I will sing, I will praise the Lord. Hallelujah. 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 I will sing, I will praise. Hallelujah. Last song,
Blessed are you, Lord my God. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu. Baruch atah Adonai Malkeinu. Baruch atah Adonai Moshienu. Blessed are you, my God. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu. Baruch atah Adonai Malkeinu. Baruch atah Adonai Moshienu. Blessed are you, my God. Blessed are you, Lord, my God, crowned with all strength and majesty. Heaven and earth testify. Blessed are you, my God. Blessed are you, Lord, my God, crowned with all strength and majesty. Heaven and earth testify. Blessed are you, my God. Blessed are you, my God. Blessed are you, my God.
Shabbat shalom, everybody. Love you.
Twice as bad, oh Lord, teach me to overcome. Demons close in front and rear and try to fill me full of fear. Oh Lord, teach me to overcome. To pray a prayer sincere and true, if only one more word be pure. Oh Lord, teach me to overcome. Oh Lord, teach me, oh teach me. Maybe your divine decree that I overcome. Oh Lord, if you're willing, teach me to overcome. Through tears and the struggles, a soul ascends the levels as you teach us to overcome. To know there's only you and only you there is to know as you teach us to overcome. Oh Lord, teach me, oh teach me, maybe your divine decree that I overcome. Oh Lord, if you're willing, oh teach me to overcome. That I overcome. Oh Lord, if you're willing, teach me to overcome. Teach me to overcome. Teach me to overcome.
Okay, I think we are live right now that I know of. So thank you, Dan, so much for leading worship, and that was great. And I was worshiping with you. And now Rachel's coming here to do some teaching this morning as we continue our service. We're continuing our service this morning. So here's Rachel.
Okay, Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Move this back a little bit. How is everyone this morning? Good. I hope a number of you listened to the worship Dan Adler was doing. And we're going to get right into the scripture this morning and do a teaching on the danger of holiness. There is great danger in holiness, and we're gonna look at that. Something I was sitting in on a class on 1 Samuel, and the class was talking about some of the unusual things that happen in reference to the tabernacle. It goes, we were reading the part where the tabernacle, the Mishkan, well, first of all, the Israelites are fighting with the Philistines, as happens throughout Judges and Samuel, and actually a large part of the Bible. And at one point, the Israelites are losing battles, so they decide that they're going to go get the tabernacle, the Mishkan, from where it's sitting at Shiloh, and they bring it into the battle to be kind of a good luck charm, I guess you could say. And rather than it causing them to win the battle, the Philistines win the battle, and not only do they win the battle, they take the tabernacle and they bring it to their one of their cities, one of their main cities. I think it's Ashdod, and cutting off my hand.
That's right.
And what happens is they put it into the temple, little temple of their god, Dagon. And when they wake up in the morning and go to see Dagon, Dagon has fallen on the ground before the Lord. And then the next morning, Dagon has fallen on the ground again, and his head and his arms are broken off. And then the city breaks out in some sort of tumors or some sort of disease. All the men at least have it. And so they move the tabernacle somewhere else, and that city gets the same plague, and so on and so forth. So this is not something to be toyed with. And that study got me thinking again about the fact that we can't play around with God's holiness, that it is, there are strictures. And the reason that God gave these strictures is because it's a very unnatural and unlikely thing for the holiness of God to dwell within within a group of human beings, which is what God said his great desire to do is to dwell in the midst of Israel, repeated many, many times. Then you shall be my people, I shall be your God. And this dwelling with, dwelling in the midst of, actually incorporating the body of Israel, indwelling the people of Israel. And we're going to see in today's portion another example of how dangerous it can be to come close to the holiness of God without the proper seriousness and without coming in the proper way that God prescribes. So our portion for today, if you have your Bibles, hopefully you do, is Shemini, which means the 8th. And this portion goes from Leviticus, Vayikra 9:1 through 11:47, through chapter 11 as we have it designated. So once again, to put this into context briefly, we see in Exodus, as I said, verse 25, chapter 25 to 35 of Exodus, Moses is still in the mountain, basically, and God is revealing to him all of the details of building the tabernacle. Great detail, all of the fine-tuned little pieces that have to be made for the rings, and even the sort of what we'd go to a hardware store that sells solid gold, well, not solid gold, but wood with gold around it, pieces and so forth. And then in 35 he starts giving the instructions to the people of Israel, and they start building it. So it's the exact same detail from chapter 25 to 35 of Exodus that Moses gives in 35 to the end of Exodus. And Exodus ends with the tabernacle being completed, the Spirit of God filling the tabernacle, and it's so strong that the people can't get near it to minister it. It's just completely filling it. And then we see, let me just look at that. So the cloud covered the tabernacle, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle, and Moses was not able to enter it because the cloud rested on it. And then what we see in Leviticus, so God gave the instructions, Moses gave the instructions to the people, and they built it. And the end of Exodus, it's built, it's ready. And then the first couple of portions of Leviticus, Vayikra, we see God getting well, we read it, we jump in, and the Lord called to Moses and spoke to him about all the offerings. So it seems to me that from chapter 1 through 8, 1 through 7, again, God is speaking to Moses and giving him the instructions about things, just like he did in Exodus chapter 25 to 35. So in chapters 1 through 7, through the end of 7, he is giving him instructions about all of the offerings and all of the doings of the tabernacle, and how the blood is to be handled, what types of animals are to be brought, what types of offerings there are, which of the offerings and which part of the offerings the Kohanim are supposed to eat in the holy place, and all of these fine details. And instead of being on the mountain at this time, it says in Vayikra 1, the first sentence, and the Lord called to Moses and spoke to him from the tabernacle of meeting. So he's speaking all of these things, giving Moses all of the instructions through 7. And then in chapter 8, he takes Aaron and his sons and brings together the congregation and does what the Lord commanded. And he anoints Aaron and his sons and has an offering to kind of inaugurate them into their priesthood. And then we see at the end of chapter 8 that they have to stay within the confines of the tabernacle for 7 days until the days of your consecration are ended. For 7 days he shall consecrate you. So Moses is still giving instructions for what the Lord told him in the tabernacle, what we see in these first 7 chapters. Therefore, I'm at 8:35. Therefore you shall stay at the door of the tabernacle of meeting day and night for 7 days, and keep the charge of the Lord, so that you may not die, for so I have been commanded. And here we see another example of the fact that the holiness of God is a dangerous thing, and they had to meet these instructions or they would die. So Aaron and his sons did all the things that the Lord had commanded by the hand of Moses. And now we come to our portion for today. And I'll read the first couple of lines and the last couple of lines. Vayihi, this is 9:1. Vayihi bayom hashmini, on the 8th day. Kara Moshe la'Aaron u'levanav. Moses called Aaron and his sons, u'leziknei Yisrael, and the elders of Israel. Vayomer el Aharon, kach lecha egel ben bakar lechatat va'ayel leolam tumim, and hakrev lifnei Adonai. So he said to Aaron, take for yourself a young bull as a sin offering and a ram as a burnt offering, without blemish, and offer them before the Lord. And then it goes on in that way. But the assumption is that the congregation of Israel, the Adah, were not standing outside the tabernacle for all of those 7 days that they had to stay there. So it looks like they went back and then they were called again for the 8th day for this new consecration of Aaron and his sons. And he had to bring all these offerings and so forth. And when they finally brought all these offerings for the consecration of the priesthood, I believe, it says in verse 22, then Aaron lifted his hand toward the people, blessed them, and came down from offering the sin offering, the burnt offering, and peace offerings. He had been up at the tabernacle for those 7 days, so he came down. And Moses and Aaron went into the tabernacle of meeting and came out and blessed the people. Then the glory of the Lord appeared to all the people, and fire came out from before the Lord and consumed the burnt offerings and the fat on the altar. When all the people saw it, they shouted and fell on their faces. Now, what were they feeling when they shouted and fell on their faces? We could say that they were shouting in joyful worship and fell on their faces in worship, but it's too reminiscent, I think, of the story when they're at the mountain of God at Sinai, at Mount Horeb. And this is in Exodus, let's say Exodus 19:10. Then the Lord said to Moses, go to the people and consecrate them today and tomorrow and let them wash their clothes. So now we have another consecration. It's of the whole people of Israel, because here is where God is going to cut the covenant between him and the children of Israel, the whole people of Israel, right here at Sinai, with the giving of the covenant, the commandments, and the verbal ascension of the people saying, yes, we will do this. We will follow it. So it's the consecration. And let them be ready for the third day. For on the third day, the Lord will come down upon Mount Sinai in the sight of all the people. You shall set bounds for the people all around, saying, take heed to yourselves, that you do not go up to the mountain or touch its base. Whoever touches the mountain shall surely be put to death. Not a hand shall touch him, but he shall surely be stoned or shot with an arrow. I think it should be touch it. Whether man or beast, he shall not live. Then the trumpet sounds, and they shall come near the mountain, which they probably didn't want to do by that time. At any rate, then we see after the giving of the 10 words, the 10 commandments as it's called, it says in verse 20:18, now all the people witnessed the thunderings, the lightning flashes, the sound of the trumpet, and this mountain smoking. And when the people saw it, they trembled and stood afar off. Then they said to Moses, you speak with us and we will hear, but do not let God speak with us lest we die. And well, then Moses says, do not fear, for God has come to test you, and that his fear may go before you so that you may not sin. So it's very interesting. There seems to be a reality of the power of God that is too much for human beings to handle. And as I was thinking about this, I thought, well, this is no wonder if this is God the Creator who, as it says in Bereshit, in Genesis, he created all things. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and it talks about creating light and so forth. Well, in today's world, we've done a lot of research, and we know that there is power in the universe way beyond anything imaginable to us. We have a small taste of it here on Earth because we have our sun, which is quite a long distance away, right? 93 million miles, I think, is the figure most people give. That's a long way away, and yet we feel its warmth. And it's the thing that actually gives us light, it gives us heat, enables us to live in this extremely cold universe in which really no living thing can live without more or less a special, really specially fine-tuned place to live that has enough light, enough heat, and certainly enough water. So we see this great power of God that we only have little hints of on this earth. We also see lightning that can strike the earth from the heavens. And people would see that lightning would set things afire. It was such a powerful force, kind of an unknown force. And it was just a little hint of God's power. But now we know a lot more about the universe and the far reaches of the universe. I think people always sensed the great power that was unattainable and unimaginable. And I think that's why God called Abraham out when he had given him the promise about making him into a great nation. This is why God called him out and said, Abraham, look at the stars. And in looking at the stars and looking at the great wonder of the stars, Abraham was able to have the faith. I think it brought faith to Abraham that what God had told him could be true. If God could make all of these stars and this great power that is so incomprehensible to us, surely he could fulfill his promise to Abraham. But this incomprehensible power is we can't live. We can't just travel. If we could even do the traveling, we can't travel to a distant star and take a look at it, walk around, see how it is. We would die. We would die from just a small portion of it, any of the power in the universe. So somehow God's holiness is part of God's character, which part of which is his power. There are a lot of places in Proverbs and other places that liken parts of God's character to things he's created on the earth, and parts of things that we should look at and we should be like in some ways. It talks about how the ants work in harmony and labor and so forth. And all of these things in some way or other reflect God's character. Even as we see in our portion today, we see the laws of kashrut, the kosher laws. And even those animals and birds and insects and things that are not kosher, that are not, that are considered an abomination in terms of eating or ingesting, they are also creations of God. And the rabbinic writings all can affirm that these are not evil in themselves. There's nothing evil about these things. And lack of holiness in a ritual way does not mean something is evil or bad. It's just not part of the particular called out options for the Jewish people. Okay, so let me go to this book. I wanted to read a bit of Michael Visegrad, who talks about the dangers. Let me just get my water. Someone said that, commented that for his message on Friday evening, Rabbi Michael wears a suit and tie, and said that I was wearing pajamas, which was kind of funny because everybody's, wearing pajamas these days or something. And I don't remember if I was actually wearing this shirt. It's one of the nicer shirts I have that doesn't have writing on it. So maybe they look like pajamas, but I might as well be in pajamas. Anyway, Michael Visegrad, a Jewish scholar who is a scholar of philosophy, and he's also a scholar of rabbinics and the Bible. And he talks in this book about how, as he's gotten older, his thinking has gotten more and more biblical. In other words, he still can use some of his philosophical knowledge and so forth to communicate in this world, but his thinking has gotten more and more biblical. So I find it very interesting that he says a couple of things that were fascinating here in regard to what we're talking about. He talks about the indwelling of God, for one thing, that God indwells the Jewish people. And he says, the Hebrew Bible speaks about God in anthropomorphic terms. I will focus on one aspect of this anthropomorphism, the indwelling of God in the tabernacle and in the temple later and in the Jewish people, because I detect a certain diluted incarnation in these ideas that will narrow but not eliminate the gap between the two faiths. Now, in this chapter, he is talking about incarnation, God's indwelling in Israel, as a way to make a bridge to the Christian idea of Yeshua being the incarnation of God, and that's why he calls this indwelling a diluted incarnation. So I'm not going to focus on that. This is his way to make a bridge between Judaism and Christianity, that God was actually incarnating Israel in this sense. But let me read this other part here. It said, God dwells in the temple, even if he is also greater than anything a building can encompass. But the transcendence of God is not newsworthy. What is newsworthy is that God dwelled in the tabernacle, in the tent of meeting, and now dwells in the temple built by Solomon in 1 Kings. God has taken residence among the people of Israel. That is what makes the space and its environs, Jerusalem and Israel, in which he dwells, holy, and it makes the people among whom he dwells holy. God has thus two dwelling places or addresses, the temple or the tabernacle in this case, and the people of Israel. He dwells in the tabernacle and among the people. After the destruction of the temple, the psalmist laments, O God, why dost thou cast us off forever? Why does thy anger smoke against the sheep of thy pasture? Remember Mount Zion, where thou hast dwelt. But before God took up residence in the Jerusalem temple, he resided, as we said, in the tabernacle. God's affinity to the people of Israel is thus deeper than his affinity to the land. And the people had its relationship to God before it entered the land. So that's moving on to another subject. But God has chosen to dwell within Israel. Now, what is the difficulty with this? Michael Visegrad sees it very clearly. He says the trouble with the election of the Jewish people, he's talking about how the Jewish people are God's elect, what is divine election, and so forth. The trouble is that the election of Israel is an election of the seed of Abraham, which is an election of the flesh. To our human religious consciousness, an election by religious sensibility rather than by birth would seem more reasonable. But the divine election, in its sovereignty, is of a people of the flesh, a people having its share, if not slightly more, of negative national characteristics accentuated by a harrowing history of suffering. So he kind of pinpoints it there, that the trouble with being the chosen people, the elect people of God, is that we are just flesh and we really can't do this thing. So he says later on, he says, as the nation in whom God dwells, Israel is in grave danger, a danger inherent in the strategy of election that God has chosen as his way of relating to humanity. At first, God did not envisage the election of a particular people. He talks about how he wanted a relationship with everyone. And still, the welfare of all humanity remains God's ultimate goal, as evidenced by his remarks to Abraham in Genesis 12. I will bless those who bless you, curse those who curse you. So the danger in being God's elect is the danger to Israel. If it disobeys, there is a high degree of danger. To be God's holy nation is a danger because God dwells in your midst. This power dwells right in your midst. It can be a danger to others also, as it says, I will curse those who curse you. So this puts some responsibility on other nations as well. And it's also specifically, as we see in our portion, a danger to those who minister at the altar. So we see that God has chosen Israel, but in a sense, by choosing Israel, has put Israel in greater danger than the rest of the nations, and specifically has put the priests that minister at the altar at the greatest danger. It just seems like if they make a false move, the fire of God is going to come down and take them. And what is this saying? I mean, I wish I could say, this way. This is one of the difficult problems that we who read the Bible seriously grapple with, and rabbis throughout history have also grappled with these problems. And today, in more modern secular Judaism, they merely evade these problems by taking a stance of everything has a natural cause. So whatever happened, was of natural means. But there is something about the holiness of God that we can't treat lightly. And it's very clear that these things can be dangerous if we take them lightly. And it got me to thinking, when God set all this up with the tabernacle and giving Moses all these particulars about how to approach the altar and how to approach him, was he not really aware of the frailty of being made of flesh? Was he not aware of the difficulty of keeping all these things? And especially in our portion today, this is pretty new to Aaron and his sons. This is not something that they've been practicing. Well, they practiced for 7 days, and that's what those 7 days were partially kind of practice session so that they could understand what to do and go through the motions several different times without the whole congregation necessarily being there. And some of the rabbis have projected that during those 7 days, they also disassembled the tabernacle every night and then reassembled it to get practice, because they were going to need to do that as they moved through the wilderness. But I don't believe the scripture says that, but it's kind of an interesting idea that was part of the practice. But we see in this portion that poor Nadab and Abihu, the sons of Aaron, who seem to be, maybe they were in their 20s. It doesn't really say how old they are, but it kind of reminds me, you know the story. They each took his censer, put fire in it and incense, brought it before the Lord, but the Lord had not commanded this, and they get consumed by the fire. And Moses said to Aaron, "This is what the Lord spoke, saying, by those who come near me, I must be regarded as holy, and before all the people, I must be glorified." And Aaron held his peace. And he has to get cousins or relatives to bring the bodies of Nadav and Abihu away from the altar. And Aaron, because the anointing oil is on him, has to stay up there and continue to minister, as do his other two sons. So what's going on here? How can God be so strict with us? And what was going on with Nadav and Abihu? Well, a lot of people say they probably were drinking, because it says just a couple verses later, the Lord speaks to Aaron saying, "Do not drink wine or intoxicating drink before you go into the tabernacle." But they also, it kind of reminds me of some tragic deaths that, we've heard about, of young people who experiment with drugs or other things and have a more or less cavalier attitude about it, that sense that they'll never die, that sense that young men often have, and have in some cases actually lost their lives, dealing with things that are more dangerous than they understand, and dealing with them lightly. And perhaps Nadav and Abihu had an attitude like that, just laughing with each other, maybe. I don't know, but in any case, it still seems kind of extra strict. And I think that it just is pointing out that we really don't understand the great power of God, the great holiness of God. And part of that great power is his great love. And we see that throughout. We see that those patterns throughout all the prophets, how God's holiness can cause destruction, but then God's love is going to bring us into this everlasting, incredible joy that we can't even imagine. And then it brings us to Yeshua. I was going to read the end of our portion today. 1147, which is right after all of the holiness laws, or not the holiness laws, but the kosher laws, which is very detailed. And by the way, just to mention something that also affects our reading of Genesis 1, when it talks about the things that creep on the earth, the creeping things that creep on the earth, this is not necessarily insects or lizards or reptiles, but it can also include rodents or other low animals that, such as verse 29 in chapter 11, "These shall be unclean to you among the creeping things that creep on the earth, the mole, the mouse, the large lizard, etc." So I just wanted to point that out. So the very last couple of verses in this portion this morning starts at verse 46. "Zot Torat habehema v'ha'of v'chol nefesh ha'chaya ha'romeset b'mayim u'lechol nefesh ha'shoretzet al ha'aretz lehavdil bein chatamei uvein hatahor uvein ha'chaya ha'ne'echelet uvein ha'chaya asher lo te'achel." So this is the law of the animals and the birds and every living creature that moves in the waters and of every creature that creeps on the earth, to distinguish between lehavdel bein, the unclean and the clean, and between the animals that may be eaten and the animal that may not be eaten. And this lehavdel bein starts again in Genesis 1. God divides or distinguishes between the waters. He distinguishes between the light and the darkness. God is in the business of distinguishing, and here he's distinguishing between the clean and unclean animals. Again, this isn't the evil and the good animals. This is the ritually clean, the ritually unclean animals, so that the people of Israel may be distinguished between the nations of the earth, because they are a holy people set apart for God within the earth, and among them the Kohanim are the holy part of the nation of Israel, set apart for God to minister at the altar. And by the way, the history of the priests ministering at the altars, there aren't any more examples right there. There is Samuel and his two sons, a little bit different story, but these priests aren't constantly being consumed by fire. This was partly an example, and this is a way that God is trying to say, this is serious. God is God, and I feel like I, for one, don't comprehend that at all. So when we look at Yeshua and we look at what God has done, we can understand why it was difficult for the Jewish people in the first century, who still had the temple, were still performing most of these rituals in the temple. Difficult for them to understand how God could indwell a human being and he could touch you and you wouldn't die, that there was not the same kind of danger here. But that's actually one of the amazing parts of the calling of Yeshua and God moving from the different aspects of his relationship with humankind that we see throughout the Bible. First creating Adam and Chava, his moving with them in the garden. It says he walked in the garden in the cool of the day, and he had a very personal relationship with them. And then Noach, then the sin, and then Noach, and the calling of Noach, and it says, I'll keep my covenant with you, whatever covenant that was. And then calling of Abraham and the Jewish people, and the different types of relationships God has within the Jewish people, and then with the Jewish people and the nations, and so forth. And then finally, fulfilling the words of the prophets that I will come down. God is going to stoop low and do something. He talks about it in the New Covenant, and right after that he's just saying, like in Jeremiah 32, it comes down to God realizing that this people is never going to be able to fully do what he wants them to do. Therefore, behold, in 32:37, behold, I will gather them out of all countries where I have driven them in my anger, in my fury, and in great wrath. I will bring them back to this place. I will cause them to dwell safely. And they shall be my people, and I will be their God. Then I will give them one heart and one way, that they may fear me forever, for the good of them and their children after them. And I will make an everlasting covenant with them, that I will not turn away from doing them good, but I will put my fear in their hearts, that they will not depart from me. Yes, I will rejoice over them to do them good, and I will assuredly plant them in this land with all my heart and all my soul. Just as I've brought all this great calamity on this people, so I'll bring them all the good that I have promised them. And we don't have time to go over all the prophets, but that good is in inhabiting a human being and bringing that presence of the Spirit of God to such a way that is no longer dangerous to us in the same way. There's still danger. We can't ever take God's holiness lightly, and we will all be judged for what we do with our time on earth and so forth. But we see the difference very clearly when Yeshua touches the lepers, say. In the time of the Torah, if someone touched a leper, they would become unclean. But when Yeshua touched a leper, the leper became clean. And this is God's holiness come to earth in a way that no one really expected exactly. and in a way that was even more gracious than what we could imagine and what we could expect. And of course, it's up to us whether we want to believe that, but it is the amazing mercy of God and glory of God and desire of God to dwell with human beings that he caused a Jewish man, Jewish baby to be born and put his spirit in that person, that we might know the indwelling power of God in a way that does not endanger us and that we can draw near to. And so it would be a shame if we have that and we don't draw near. So let's just pray. Lord, I pray that you would give us each a way to understand this great holiness that you are, this great power that you are, and yet the great mercy that you have done so much to give us a way to draw near to you, that we need not fear, in the same way that the priests had to fear the Lord, even the Kohanim, that those of us that are not Kohanim, even those of us that are not Jewish, can draw near to God in a way that we need not fear. And we thank you for this, and I pray that you would help those who do not understand this to understand, and that you would reveal, because it does take a revelation, and it doesn't come through our intellect, Lord God. Pray for revelation for those that don't understand, and we ask this in Yeshua's name.
Amen. Amen. Thank you so much, Rachel. She always, Rachel always has something to say that's quite amazing. Always. We're going to close with the Aaronic benediction in just a minute, but also I just want to say I'm hopeful that this can end soon, but I'm glad, as I said last night, excuse me, that we're able to meet in this context. And just want to remind everybody to keep in touch with each other, keep in touch with the synagogue. We'll be back in the sanctuary before we know it, and we'll have a huge celebrative time there, a worship celebration and joyous celebration when that occurs. Meanwhile, you can avail yourself of the website. Those who have an ongoing involvement and commitment to the congregation, the things that are there that people who have ongoing relationship with the congregation can take advantage of or avail themselves of, as far as their overall and weekly involvement and commitment, and that would be bethmessiah.net. And this will also be on YouTube, what was taught today and also last night at Beth Messiah Congregation's, Beth Messiah Cincinnati's YouTube page. And it will be also on archived on this, Facebook, Beth Messiah Facebook page as well. And so thankful, and my own as well. We're thankful to be with you today, and love everybody. And I always say that, but it's true. So let's say the Aaronic benediction, and then we'll close. Yivarechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha, Ye'er Adonai panav alecha v'yichunecha, Yisa Adonai panav alecha v'yasem lecha shalom. The Lord bless you and keep you, cause his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. Lift up the light of his countenance, in the name of the Messiah Yeshua. Amen and amen and amen. And we love you guys, and we look forward to continuing this way until hopefully things open up, and that's what we're all praying for. So God bless you all. Shalom.